Imagine this. You've just finished a long, exhausting shift at the hospital. You're tired, your feet ache, and all you want is to go home, hug your kids, and maybe get a few hours of sleep before your next shift. But as you walk through the door, something feels off. The house is quiet. Too quiet. And then, you hear it. Soft whispers, the rustle of fabric, and the unmistakable sound of intimacy. Your heart skips a beat as you step into the living room, and there they are. Your husband and your best friend, locked in an embrace that shatters your world in an instant. This wasn't just a scene from a movie. This was Sandra Floyd's reality. A dedicated nurse, a loving mother, and a loyal wife, Sandra had built a life she thought was secure. But on the evening of May 27, 2024, everything she believed in came crashing down. What followed was a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and a crime so shocking, it left an entire community in disbelief. Today, we're going to explore the tragic tale of Sandra Floyd, the nurse who murdered her best friend after discovering she'd been sleeping with her husband. But before we dive into the details, let me ask you this. What would you do if the two people you trusted most betrayed you? Would you confront them? Walk away? Or would you, like Sandra, take matters into your own hands? Let me know in the comments below. Now, let's start at the beginning, with Sandra's life before everything fell apart. Sandra Floyd was 42 years old when her life took a dark turn. She had been a registered nurse for over 15 years, working tirelessly at St. Luke's Hospital in Houston. Her colleagues knew her as someone who always put others first, her patients, her family, and her friends. Sandra was the kind of person who would drop everything to help someone in need. At home, Sandra was a devoted wife and mother. She had been married to Elias Floyd, a high school teacher, for 12 years. Together, they had 2 children, Lashley, who was 10, and Emmett, who was just 6. The Floyd family lived in Clear Lake City, a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood in Houston. From the outside, their life seemed perfect. But as we'll soon see, appearances can be deceiving. Elias Floyd, Sandra's husband, was a man who seemed content with his life. He was a respected teacher, known for his patience and dedication to his students. But behind closed doors, Elias was struggling. His marriage to Sandra had been strained for months. Long shifts at the hospital left Sandra exhausted, and Elias often felt neglected. He craved attention, affection, something Sandra didn't always have the energy to give. And then there was Angela Williams. Angela was Sandra's best friend, a friendship that had lasted over 20 years. At 38, Angela was the kind of person everyone wanted in their corner. She was supportive, understanding, and always there when you needed her. She had been a constant presence in the Floyd household, often visiting and spending time with Sandra and the kids. But Angela had a secret, one that would destroy Sandra's world. By May 2024, Sandra and Elias's marriage was hanging by a thread. The long hours at the hospital were taking a toll on Sandra, and Elias's growing dissatisfaction was becoming harder to ignore. The couple argued more frequently, and the once strong bond between them was starting to fray. But Sandra had no idea that Elias had found comfort in the arms of her best friend. The affair between Elias and Angela had been going on for almost a year. It began in early 2023, during a particularly rough patch in Sandra and Elias's marriage. At first, it was just innocent flirting, a few text messages here, a casual coffee date there. But soon, the relationship became more intimate. Angela knew what she was doing was wrong, but she couldn't help herself. She had always been close to Elias, and as Sandra became more distant, Angela found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't expected. For Elias, the affair was a way to escape the problems in his marriage. He felt neglected by Sandra, and Angela's attention made him feel wanted again. But secrets have a way of coming to light, and on the evening of May 27, 2023, Sandra's world came crashing down. Sandra had been feeling off all day. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She decided to leave her shift early and head home to be with her husband, who was supposed to be home alone. The kids had gone to their grandparents for the weekend. When she walked through the door, she heard sounds coming from the living room. As she stepped inside, she froze. There, on the couch, was Elias, her husband, locked in an intimate embrace with Angela, her best friend. The room went silent as Sandra stood in the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. Her worst fears had been confirmed. The two people she trusted most in the world had betrayed her in the most intimate way possible. The confrontation that followed was intense, emotional, and heartbreaking. Sandra screamed at them, demanding to know how long this had been going on. Both Elias and Angela tried to explain, but their words only made things worse. Sandra's trust had been shattered. She felt humiliated, devastated, and ultimately, betrayed beyond repair. After hours of heated arguing, Sandra stormed out of the house and spent the night at a nearby hotel. But what happened next would shock everyone who knew her. At 5:45 a.m. on May 28, 2024, Sandra received a call from Angela. Angela tried to apologize for everything that had happened, claiming that she didn't want to lose their friendship. But it was too late. Sandra had already made up her mind. Later that day, she called Angela back and told her to meet her in a secluded area, pretending to want to talk things through. Angela had no idea she was walking into a trap. The timeline of events was rapid and tragic. On May 28, 2024, just before midnight, Sandra and Angela met behind the Harbor Diner, an isolated location Sandra knew well from her late-night shifts. Their conversation started innocently enough. Angela apologized, but Sandra's mind was already made up. Fueled by anger, betrayal, and despair, Sandra confronted Angela about the affair. The argument grew more intense, and in a fit of rage, Sandra grabbed a kitchen knife from her car. Angela, frightened and confused, tried to back away, but Sandra lunged at her, stabbing her 4 times in the abdomen. The shock of the attack left Angela unable to react quickly enough. Sandra watched her die, then abandoned her body in the alley behind the diner, leaving Angela to die in the cold, dark night. The Harbor Diner, a 24-hour establishment known for its greasy breakfast food and dimly lit interior, was located in an industrial area on the outskirts of town. It was the perfect location for Sandra's deadly confrontation with Angela. The alley behind the diner, dimly lit and isolated, was where Angela's body was found early the next morning, discarded as though she were just another victim of an anonymous crime. The motivations behind the murder were clear yet complex. Sandra's actions were driven by the overwhelming feelings of betrayal and despair she felt upon discovering the affair. But there were deeper layers. Sandra had always prided herself on being the strong one, the woman who could handle anything. But the discovery of the affair shattered her self-image and her belief in the foundation of her family and friendships. She didn't just lose trust in her husband and her best friend, she lost herself. The pain was too much to bear. The thought of her family unraveling, of her children growing up without both parents together, was something she couldn't accept. Sandra felt powerless, and in that moment, she took control in the only way she thought possible. The investigation began the moment Angela's body was discovered on the morning of May 29, 2024. A passerby noticed something unusual in the alley behind the Harbor Diner and called the police. When officers arrived, they found Angela's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood. At first, the police suspected a random robbery gone wrong. The industrial area was known for its occasional petty crimes. But as investigators looked closer, things didn't add up. Angela's wallet and phone were still on her, and there were no signs of a struggle. The positioning of Angela's body also raised red flags. She was lying on her back, her arms at her sides, as if she had been placed there deliberately. This wasn't the work of a random thief, it was something far more personal. Sandra Floyd was one of the first people questioned by the police. After all, she was one of the last people to have seen Angela alive. When detectives arrived at her home, Sandra was calm but visibly shaken. She told them she had argued with Angela the night before but claimed she hadn't seen her since. But Sandra's story didn't hold up under scrutiny. Investigators noticed inconsistencies in her account of the night. She couldn't explain why her car had been spotted near the Harbor Diner around the time of the murder. And when detectives searched her vehicle, they found something that would change the course of the investigation: bloodstains on the passenger seat. Forensic evidence became the key to cracking the case. The bloodstains in Sandra's car were matched to Angela's DNA. Investigators also recovered the murder weapon, a kitchen knife, from the scene of the crime. The knife had been wiped clean, but traces of Sandra's DNA were found on the handle. Within 48 hours of Angela's body being discovered, Sandra Floyd was arrested and charged with her murder. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Friends, family, and neighbors couldn't believe that Sandra, a dedicated nurse and loving mother, could be capable of such a violent crime. But as the evidence piled up, it became clear that Sandra's actions were driven by a deep sense of betrayal and despair. As Sandra sat in her jail cell, awaiting trial, the reality of what she had done began to sink in. But it was too late. Angela was gone, and Sandra's life would never be the same. Sandra Floyd's trial began on September 17, 2024. The courtroom was packed with friends, family, and members of the community who had followed the case closely. Everyone wanted to know, how could a woman like Sandra commit such a heinous crime? The prosecution painted Sandra as a cold-blooded killer. They argued that she had planned the murder in advance, luring Angela to the secluded area behind the Harbor Diner with the intent to kill her. The bloodstains in Sandra's car and the DNA evidence on the knife were presented as irrefutable proof of her guilt. But Sandra's defense team had a different story to tell. They argued that Sandra had acted in a moment of passion, driven by the overwhelming emotions of betrayal and heartbreak. They painted a picture of a woman who had been pushed to her breaking point. The trial was emotionally charged, with both sides presenting compelling arguments. Elias Floyd took the stand, his voice trembling as he described the strain in his marriage and the affair that had destroyed his family. He admitted that he had been wrong to betray Sandra but insisted that he never imagined things would end this way. In the end, the jury found Sandra Floyd guilty of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. The verdict left the community divided. Some believed that Sandra had gotten what she deserved, while others felt that the sentence was too harsh. After all, Sandra wasn't a hardened criminal. She was a woman who had been pushed to the edge by the people she trusted most. As Sandra was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she turned to look at Elias one last time. There were no words, just a look of profound sadness and regret. The aftermath of the trial was devastating for everyone involved. Elias struggled to rebuild his life, raising Lashley and Emmett on his own. The children, now without their mother, were left to grapple with the knowledge of what she had done. Angela's family, meanwhile, was left to mourn the loss of a daughter, sister, and friend. They couldn't understand how someone they had trusted could take her life in such a brutal way. As Sandra sat in her prison cell, reflecting on the choices that had led her there, she couldn't help but wonder, was there another way? Could she have walked away, sought help, or found a way to heal from the betrayal? But it was too late for what-ifs. Angela was gone, and Sandra's life would never be the same. The story of Sandra Floyd is a tragic one, filled with betrayal, heartbreak, and unimaginable loss. It's a story that forces us to ask difficult questions about love, trust, and the lengths we might go to when we feel betrayed. Was Sandra justified in her actions? Or did she take things too far? These are questions that don't have easy answers. On one hand, Sandra was a woman who had been deeply wronged by the two people she trusted most. On the other hand, her decision to take Angela's life was a permanent solution to a temporary problem, one that left her children without a mother and a community in shock. As we reflect on this story, it's important to remember that everyone involved was human. Sandra, Elias, and Angela were all flawed individuals who made mistakes that had devastating consequences. But perhaps the most important lesson we can take from this story is the importance of communication and seeking help when we're struggling. Sandra's marriage was already in trouble long before the affair began. If she and Elias had sought counseling or found a way to reconnect, could this tragedy have been avoided? And what about Angela? If she had been honest with Sandra about her feelings for Elias, could things have turned out differently? These are questions we may never have answers to. But they serve as a reminder that our actions, no matter how small, can have far-reaching consequences. Before we end this video, I want to ask you one final question. What would you have done if you were in Sandra's shoes? Would you have confronted Angela and Elias? Walked away? Or would you have taken matters into your own hands? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime content.